VRProud.com presents Candid Conversations, Breaking Barriers of Black Mental Illness. Now, here are your hosts, Jaron Jordan and Tavarius Haywood.
Hey there, friends. Good evening to you. I'm Jaron Jordan.
And I'm Tavarius Haywood. Tonight's episode of Candid Conversations, we're breaking through the hush of mental health in the Black community. We'll answer questions of why it just isn't talked about and how that has deep roots dating back to slavery.
We'll also take a deep dive into the relationship we as Black men have with mental health and therapy, while highlighting different organizations and resources that are available to those right now in the capital city that may be struggling with mental health.
And we start the conversation off with the people taking the issue to the heart, where Black men in the community come together, the barbershop.
I sat down with a few men to talk about the stigma that comes along with seeking help for your mental health and what we can do to change that. On a Friday afternoon at Webb's Barbershop in Baton Rouge, you can expect it to be buzzing with activity. Men in and out for a cut or a shave, or just to catch up with friends who are more like family. Generationally, the shop is where you're open to talk about anything. But one conversation not happening here today is about mental health. I spent nearly 2 hours here talking with men about the stigma of mental health and how to end it. All agreed it's something we need to talk about more openly, but none agreed to talk openly about it with me on camera.
That's the stigma. And if I know that somebody's gonna tell me to go see my crazy doctor, then I'm gonna look for other alternatives, to deal with that.
Alex Quintua is a licensed professional counselor at LSU's Student Health Center. He's only one of 2 male counselors on staff and one of only 2 Black men in the department working to end the stigma surrounding mental health.
We have to begin to work towards the process of, creating more awareness, especially in the community.
While mental health impacts everyone, nearly 1 in 5 U.S. adults, according to the National Institute of Mental Health, it's increasingly impacting Black children. In 2019, the CDC listed suicide as the second leading cause of death in Black people between the ages of 15 and 24.
Sometimes most Black men will resort to other means, to cope with stress, like marijuana and many other, sources like alcohol and things like that. So it's very difficult for a typical male to sit in front of, because, again, it still boils down to trust and cultural beliefs and the stigma that surrounds it.
If 10 people are coming in, 9 of them are white and 8 of them are female.
Don Long is working with Quintua to change the overall perception about mental health, especially in the Black community.
I definitely wouldn't call it a weakness to seek help and improve yourself, but that's like a big part of the stigma. You're weak if you go try to get help.
Another big part of that stigma, he says, is trust.
We don't want people in our business. That's not outside the family, outside of just our immediate circle. We don't want people in our business. So what is this person going to think of me? How's this person going to label me? How's this person going to attach a negative stigma to me if I'm trying to confide in them and tell them that, hey, I'm going to counseling.
Most Black males have gone through a lot of trauma. Particularly, I will use myself as an example. Whenever like I said, I was not born here, but whenever I see the blue light behind me, I'm talking about police, I'm always terrified and things like that. So it's difficult to trust a system, a particular system, that does not, that made you to go through a lot.
While there's no one-size-fits-all approach to ending the stigma associated with mental health, Quintua and Long say it will take normalizing these conversations, recruiting more Black men into the field, and all of us showing a little bit of empathy for one another to move the needle.
I believe that there has to be a lot of training, a lot of competence, cultural competence, and people need to be trained, to be able to understand the feelings that a lot of people are going through and things like that.
Coming up, we take a look back into the past to see how the mental trauma of slavery still haunts many African Americans today. That's coming up next.
And coming up a little later, the city of Baton Rouge is taking a big step in addressing mental health with one of the most vulnerable populations in our city. We'll tell you about the new team now hitting the streets to bring this conversation straight to the community.
We now return to Candid Conversations, breaking barriers of Black mental illness.
We start this part of our Candid Conversations talking about the past. We can't understand where we are now without understanding our past. Today we have Dr. Tama Bryant. She currently teaches psychology at the Graduate School of Education and Psychology at Pepperdine University. She's also known around the world for her work in psychology. She is a representative for the American Psychological Association for the United Nations, and she is a very popular podcast host and it's called Homecoming. Dr. Tama, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
No, I'm going to kick things off. Now, this psychological disturbance that we see today in many African Americans surrounding mental health did not come overnight. Can you talk a little bit about where we are now and take us back to the very beginning before our ancestors were forced to America?
Yes, thank you so much for raising this, because it is important for us to consider trauma on multiple levels. We have the trauma of a global pandemic, we have the trauma of contemporary racism, and we also have the trauma of what is called historical or intergenerational or ancestral trauma. And so recognizing the ways in which those consequences still show up for us today. So some may wonder, how is trauma passed down through the generations? A part of it is through our stories and what we are told. It also affected the parenting styles of our ancestors. When you are in danger, you raise your children differently in terms of the level of fear and the need to be vigilant. It also shows up in our bodies. There's an impact neurologically in our brains and physiologically in our bodies, and also through observations. We observed how our parents or grandparents would act in certain circumstances, and those were pieces that taught us how to try to function and survive. And so it is important that we think about healing the wounds of what has happened to us directly, as well as the wounds of what has happened to our ancestors, because it affects us in depression and anxiety and substance dependence, coping with emotional eating, in all of these different ways, as well as distrust. It affects our relationship with others, as well as our relationship with ourselves.
Generational trauma, and again, how is that passed down to generation to generation?
Yes. So generational trauma or intergenerational trauma is when one generation within a family or within a community experiences a trauma, and the effects of that are passed down to the next generation. And there are three primary ways that trauma can be passed down. One of them is physically. So we recognize trauma actually affects the brain. It changes the brain. And so when we look at the descendants of large-scale traumas, we see that different portions of the brain function in ways that are trying to sustain a sense of regulation, internal regulation. The good news is that not only does trauma affect the brain, but healing affects the brain. So the key word in that is something called neuroplasticity, which is the brain can change, which we would say the brain can heal, that we can heal, and that when we heal, we can then pass that down to the next generation. So not only does the trauma get passed down in terms of our physical bodies, it also gets passed down in the messages that we are taught. When you think about if your parents told you that you have to be twice as good, or if your parents told you to never let people see you cry, never let people read your emotions, to mask our emotions, that becomes a survival strategy that was taught. That is a way the trauma gets passed down, and also through modeling. So we see by example the way those who came before us learned how to survive, sometimes by shrinking, by choosing silence, by working strategically behind the scenes. And so we learn that through modeling. So for each of us, you want to think about the wounds that I carry may not have begun with me, but the wounds that I carry have, some of them predated me. And so what did I learn from those who came before me that is showing up in my life? What is the wisdom I want to hold on to? And what is the wound that I want to heal?
Why do people still carry the negative response or the negative connotation to mental health as it pertains to the legacy of slavery?
So one of the reasons why people will hold stigma about having mental health consequences of racism and of slavery is because our educational system has often diluted the realities of what enslavement was. And as long as we have history books and social studies books that give it one sentence, that say they were slaves and they were happy and then they were free and now they can be even happier, right? When we have that simplistic view, it does not make sense that it would have the sting and the consequence that it has. And so, in order to remove the stigma or to raise awareness about these mental health consequences, requires an actual truth telling and education about the process of enslavement.
All right, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Tamer. The conversation continues coming up next.
We now return to Candid Conversations, breaking barriers of Black mental illness.
Dr. Jeremy Blunt is with us now, and Dr. Blunt, thank you so much for being with us and being a part of this important conversation. You are a representative of the BH Hot Team, is that correct?
That is correct.
BH Hot Team, the homeless outreach team. This is a new team that just launched in East Baton Rouge Parish. Tell us about what this is all about and where the need came from to create this.
It's a collaboration, a citywide collaboration between the Baton Rouge Police Department and the Sheriff's Office, as well as behavioral health companies like myself. That we go in and we provide comprehensive assessments, we care coordination, as well as some critical needs and resources that the homeless need to help them make some shifts and make some changes, provide the resources that they need to become better parts of our society.
What is the relationship between reaching out to the homeless in the capital city and behavioral health and mental health?
Oh, it is huge. Many of those that are out that are living on the streets, many of them deal with some form of mental disorder or mental health issue. And from my experience, I will tell you that being homeless itself is a form of trauma. It's a mental health issue all by itself, and especially whatever, different avenues bring people to a place of homelessness. No one as a child says, hey, I want to grow up and I want to be homeless when I grow up. But to be at that place, to not have a bed to sleep in at night, not knowing necessarily where your next meal is going to come from, it is a mental challenge by itself. So now understanding that piece of it, that's where the mental health part really comes in. Being able to provide them and get them the services that for whatever reason they haven't gotten up to that point in their life.
It's affecting everyone, but we look at the impacts of the disproportionality of it. What are you seeing in that regards?
I would tell you that one is affecting African American community majorly because growing up, and I'm glad you asked it this way to talk. Growing up, there used to be this thing that we all took care of our own, and everybody knew that person in the family, that cousin, that uncle, that you knew something was wrong, something was going on, but the family really kind of took care of them. They took them in, and they kind of sheltered them from everything else, like this was going to be their world. And they brought whatever resources, whatever needs that that person needed, they brought it to them. Well, that's not our society now. Now it's the thing to shun them away. So you're shunned away from your family, you're shunned away from the resources, you're shunned away from the people that would normally you would go to provide those things. But on top of all of that, you have the stigmatism of mental health. So that we act like there's nothing wrong. And so especially in the African American community, they don't want to talk, they don't want to discuss, because we have this age-old saying, what is talking to somebody going to change? And these things have what is the reason why it has affected our communities in such the way that it has.
And so knowing that and knowing that that issue is out there, how do you all as this newly formed BH Hot team plan to go out and actually, hopefully change things in the community?
This behavioral health team is going to build relationships with these homeless, the homeless community in a different way than maybe we've done in the past, because there's a stigma against police officers, that thinking all of them are against them. Well, in many cases, those police officers, and it's a specific group of police officers that we've used on the team, they're going to go out and make the initial contact. And then they'll start building a relationship, and then we'll come in and we'll add to that by providing the resources, doing the assessments on them to really build a rapport, and then being able to direct them in the to the nearest outlets that they can, so that we can help them improve their situation.
Dr. Jeremy Blunt, a representative from the BH Hot team, newly formed here in Baton Rouge. Thanks so much for being a part of this conversation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Still ahead, a new facility is now open in Baton Rouge, and it's the first of its kind in the state of Louisiana. After the break, we'll talk with representatives from the Bridge Center for Hope about how they're bridging the divide in this mental health conversation.
We now return to Candid Conversations, breaking barriers of Black mental illness.
We're joined now by two representatives from the Bridge Center for Hope here in the capital city. We have the executive director, Ms. Charlotte Claiborne, joining us, as well as Ms. Leisha Best. She is the state director for RI International. Thank you both for being here with us and partaking in this very important conversation on mental health and some of the resources that are available right here in the capital city. We want to start with getting an understanding of what the Bridge Center for Hope is. This is a fairly new facility in the greater capital region. So kind of explain to us what we're talking about here.
So the Bridge Center for Hope is actually the first ever crisis receiving center here in the state of Louisiana. We were a nonprofit that formed roughly around 2016, and we went out and tried to canvass the area to figure out what we could do to be able to provide mental health and substance use services for the East Baton Rouge population, primarily trying to alleviate some of the pressures that's on the emergency rooms, and then also act as a diversion for people who may be taken to parish prison who are suffering from mental health and substance use services. So our mission basically is to be able to provide pathways to treatment for individuals experiencing a behavioral health challenge, and then connecting them to providers that will be able to create a continuum of care from rehabilitation to prevention.
Talk about the services that are offered at the Bridge Center for Hope.
Yeah, so it's a crisis facility for adults 18 and up that need mental health or substance use services. So they can walk in at any time. They'll be greeted by our staff members and receive services at that time, no matter the crisis. The
question is, what are you guys actually seeing on the ground day to day here in the capital city working with some of these issues?
The individuals that come in, they come in for mental health and substance use, and so they come in with a host of different crises, and sometimes they know what it is, and sometimes they need some guidance in figuring out what that crisis is, and we're there to help them no matter the situation.
And you all work hand in hand with the police department here to try to not take so many people to jail if they're having a mental health crisis. Explain that process.
So the process is we have what is called a no wrong door approach. What that means is that anyone who's suffering from a mental health or substance use crisis can come to the facility, whether they're escorted by a first responder or if they come in on their own. At the Bridge Center for Hope, there is a police or law enforcement drop-off position, so it's in the back of the facility, and it allows law enforcement to come in, drop individuals off, and then be able to go back onto their duty without having to any interruption of service, as minimal as possible.
What's the success rate with this?
So we've been extremely successful. Initially, when we were trying to figure out how the Bridge Center will operate before we had a service provider, we knew that we needed to be able to get law enforcement in and out. And so when we were looking at service providers, one of the successes that RI has is that they're able to get individuals in within 5 to 7 minutes. We are lucky to say that for the East Baton Rouge Parish area, we're able to do it in 3.5 minutes.
Talk a little bit about, you talked about the Bridge Center for Hope really being birthed out of this need in East Baton Rouge Parish to address some of these issues. Talk about that need still existing now. Where are we with this mental health conversation?
Well, I think we're in the beginning of the cusp of this mental health conversation. I think if you go back several years, we always knew that it was there. The people who are providers knew that there was a need, but I think now it's becoming more prevalent and everybody's being able to focus on it. I think a lot of people need to understand that mental health is just like your physical health. We've focused so much on physical health that we've neglected to put that same type of emphasis on our mental health services. So I think with COVID and the pandemic and all these other things that have gone over the last several years, people are beginning to understand, okay, I need to start taking more care of my mental versus my physical, or vice versa, both.
We hear this term, this phrase used a lot when we talk about mental health, that it is okay not to be okay. What does that mean?
That just means that it is important to focus on yourself. Sometimes I think people try to say that, I don't want to burden anyone with my problems. And so I think as a community, we need to come together and say that mental health is important and you should focus on yourself and get the help that you need, just as with physical health. If you have a high blood pressure, diabetes, you will go to the doctor. So if you feel like you need some type of care in regards to your mental health, absolutely you should reach out to someone and get that help.
How can we break that stigma in the Black community when it comes to mental health?
Yeah, so in the Black community, you always hear that we keep our problems in-house. Don't tell anybody what's going on. And I think for us, it's time for us to come together and talk about these issues and talk about the services in your community, and be a part of that, a part of changing that stigma and saying that it's okay to talk to each other. It's okay to reach out for help. And when I'm not feeling well, I should reach out to my neighbor. I should reach out to my friends, and I should reach out to the resources and really try to figure out how to get better.
Definitely, it's a community effort to move forward with this. Where do you see the Bridge Center for Hope in maybe the next year, since you guys are so new, the next year, maybe 3 years from now?
Well, we're focused on trying to make sure we get this right. Because we're the first to ever do it in the state, we want to make sure that we are providing the type of crisis services for our community. So I think in the next year, we're going to be perfecting the services. I know that there are some things that are going to come down the pike in the state of Louisiana that deals with crisis services. You have the 988, which is the new hotline, or not hotline, but the new phone number for mental health services, similar to 911. But if you're having a mental health issue, you'll dial 988. So I think we need to kind of see how that's going to integrate with crisis services, how that's going to integrate with East Baton Rouge Parish and the state as a whole. Ultimately, what we would like to do is be able to not only be pioneers for the state, but to be able to have other communities and other parishes replicate what we've done here in the Bridge Center. So we're basically just trying to perfect it right now.
The Bridge Center for Hope is open 24 hours, 7 days a week. We're always open, and so individuals that need services, they can come in at any time to receive those services, or they can contact us at the facility and talk through what those services are. Even as a family member, they can call the facility and ask as many questions as they need to get their individual there to get some support.
Same question.
Yeah, just any final words, any last thoughts from you?
I'd like to tell everybody, go to our webpage, which is brbridge.org, and on that webpage, it gives the same information. It also allows you to be able to see what the facility looks like. There are some pictures on it, and then it also talks about how the Bridge Center, the nonprofit, was formed. Then also it talks about RI International and how they were chosen as a service provider.
Great. We have Ms. Charlotte Claiborne as well as Leisha Best representing the Bridge Center for Hope here in Baton Rouge. We're going to have information on the resources that they provide on our website, brproud.com. That's all the time we have for now, but this conversation on mental health in the Black community continues in just a few short minutes on our website, brproud.com, and on our Facebook page.
Our colleague Jonah Gilmore will further the conversations. He's sitting down with one local attorney that tackles major civil rights issues in our community, how that takes a toll on his mental health and how he's coping with it. That's in our Color Crossroads series.
That's our show for tonight, but if you'd like to know more about anything we talked about during tonight's conversations, all you have to do is go to beourproud.com.
There you'll also find the full in-depth interviews with all of our guests tonight, and you'll find a full version of the show in case you missed any of it. Thanks for watching.
Have a good night.